Day, June 2nd, 2021, Sequim, Washington. It's 2 a.m. when Kiana Troxler starts her graveyard shift at a local gas station.
Right when I got to work, I had told myself, today's gonna be a good day. One of my other supervisors, he laughed and slapped his knee. He's like, haha, yeah, right. I'm like, nah, you wait and see. It's gonna be a good day.
Kiana is one of 5 employees working that day.
Not too busy, not too slow, just regular day of business.
But just after 9 a.m., all of that changes. A white van pulls up, and after attaching the pump to his car, the driver heads inside.
He locks his doors, but the flowing gas pump is still there, unattended, pumping gas.
This is risky because we've all seen the signs at the gas station. Don't leave the pump unattended.
And this man is about to find out why.
We see a stranger creep up and start exhibiting some odd behavior.
He looks suspicious right from the first moment.
We see him standing between the 2 pillars, and to most people, it might look like this guy is just zoning out, but what he's really looking for is an opportunity.
The man heads straight for the unattended pump.
He just starts to, act like he's filling up his van. That's not his vehicle.
When the driver returns, he doesn't notice the man at first. But when he hits the unlock button, the stranger makes a bold move.
The guy is trying to get into the van.
Realizing that this man is trying to steal his car, the driver confronts him.
I can only imagine the conversation if you walk back out to your car and there's a stranger pumping your gas.
The stranger tried to tell the customer that he worked there and he wanted to help them. And when the man said no, I believe that's when he really started to get angry. And so the customer came inside to seek help.
Hearing some commotion, other customers step in, including one man who happens to be licensed to carry a gun.
This customer is legally armed, and he decides to pull out his weapon, maybe just to intimidate him.
But even though a man has now approached him with a gun in his hand, the stranger still refuses to back away from the car.
The man with the gas is fearless. He's completely unfazed.
And he's angry. He picks up the gas nozzle and points it right at the man holding the gun.
This person starts to spray the gas. So then he realizes, listen, if a gun isn't going to stop this guy, I need to get out of here because I'm going to get set on fire.
He even tries to chase him with the gas nozzle, but it's too short.
That's when the situation gets out of control.
911, where is your emergency? What's going on?
Somebody is pouring gas over people's vehicles and saying he's going to set them on fire.
This is incredibly dangerous. The crazed man is dousing everything with gasoline.
He's spraying gas all over the place, slipping around.
Startled staff inside the store watch it all unfold on live security footage. If the pumps catch fire, this could turn into a deadly inferno within seconds.
What is this guy thinking? What if that van blows up?
The frightened manager goes outside to try and reason with the man, who is now brandishing a lighter.
He was saying, don't do this, you don't want to do this, put it down.
Things are starting to get wild. The gas is spilling everywhere. This is extremely dangerous. We're dealing with explosive materials here. And this guy's so frantic and violent, he doesn't even care.
The man is in such a reckless rage. He seems to want everything and everyone to go up in flames.
Witnesses say the man starts making threats to blow up the gas station.
Pouring gasoline over himself and threatening to do it to my manager also.
He's willing to set himself on fire and burn the whole place down and anybody else who's around.
Terrified for her manager's life, Kiana hits the emergency shutoff valve inside the store.
Okay, we shut the pump shut off. Oh, my Lord.
This is a recipe for disaster. The concrete, the van, the pump, and even people around are covered in gasoline.
And then the man sparks a lighter.
And within a second, we see a flame.
Oh, my God, they set it on fire.
They set it on fire?
They set it on fire.
Okay.
They set it on fire.
This is absolutely horrifying.
He drops the nozzle, ignites the lighter, and then within seconds, the whole place goes up in flames. The fire explodes.
Even inside the store, people feel the impact.
I felt the sliding doors shake. Everything on the counter kind of jumped. It was a large explosion.
Panicked, Kiana races to the intercom.
Everybody please evacuate all vehicles from the gas pumps now. There's a fire.
The pumps are down. We shut them down.
He was just trying to destroy basically everything and anything. He set himself and my manager on fire.
In the midst of the chaos, Kiana's boss manages to fight through the blaze to grab an extinguisher.
It's like a dark figure and very bright, fiery image. He immediately grabbed the fire extinguisher and started extinguishing the flames from the bottom like you're supposed to do.
He even turns the extinguisher on the man who just tried to kill him.
You can see my manager pushing the stranger out of the fire over while both of their shoes are on fire.
He saved this arsonist's life. He sprayed this guy with an extinguisher at short range.
But the danger is far from over.
So what if the flames leaked to the underground tanks? There could have been a massive explosion that could have killed people from miles away.
In the video, you can see those two metal circles right in the right part of the frame. That is the fuel tank itself. If the fuel would have wandered down into those holes, it could have been way worse, and I might not be alive today.
Despite the imminent danger, the undeterred arsonist remains determined to get away.
You can see the stranger jump right back into the deepest part of the fire, attempting to steal the white van, but it is locked. He decides to try the white pickup next and is successful.
They stole the gentleman's truck and took off, so we did not see who it was.
Okay, ma'am. And did we see which direction the truck left?
We were in shock.
Instead of thanking this gas manager for saving his life, he steals a truck and then speeds away.
The man peels off onto the roadway, driving recklessly for 11 miles before coming to a dramatic halt.
He crashes the truck into a Washington State trooper. The officer was in his car just pulling over a semi-truck when he gets hit. The injuries were so severe that both were airlifted to the hospital.
Back at the station, Kiana's boss is miraculously alive with only minor injuries.
My manager was very fortunate. The only damage he had to himself was the hair on his arms were a little singed and the soles of his shoes were slightly melted.
Police identify the arsonist as 40-year-old David Johnson, a repeat offender who'd only been out of jail for 2 weeks. He faces multiple charges, including first-degree arson, first-degree attempted robbery, and second-degree assault, as well as theft of a motor vehicle and 2 counts of malicious mischief.
A lot of people say that it might have been, fair for him to be charged with attempted murder. I believe he did try to kill quite a few people that day.
People wonder if Johnson had a death wish.
When you have a weapon pointed at you and it doesn't bother you, like pointed at your head, that really, speaks to me that you do want to die. And that day, I don't think he really cared who he took with him. I do hope that the man gets the help he does need. Hopefully he can turn his life around and understand what he did was very wrong and quite selfish.
6 days after the incident, the sheriff's department releases the video to the public, and it instantly goes viral.
Some new video showing what a man was up to in Sequim before hitting and injuring a Washington State officer.
It was all over social media.
After seeing that video online, Kiana's family is relieved that she and her co-workers are not hurt.
My fiance was really happy that I was home safe, and we're both really good friends with my manager, so we were really happy that he was at home safe with his family.
In spite of the terrifying ordeal, Kiana still decided to return to work.
I was pretty freaked out the day of. I was not afraid to go back to work because chances of this happening again in my lifetime fairly slim. I'm not going to let it take control of my life.
Kiana's manager has shied away from the media spotlight, but people consider him a hero.
My manager basically saved everyone's life that day. A lot of people come into the store and they'll be like, good job. And he's like, thanks, I did what I had to do. And I'm like, you're a hero, dude. Like, you're come on now. You're a superhero. Like, you're amazing. You know you are. Accept it.
As for Kiana, she copes with a sense of dark humor.
People would ask, like, how's your day? Or how's it going? I'd be like, well, I almost died at work and my manager saved my life. But other than that, everything's good. Business as usual.
In another Washington city, another employee also faces terrifying danger on the job. February 15th, 2020, Everett, Washington, 10:50 p.m. Chris Vincent is a longtime bud tender at a local dispensary.
Being a bud tender is pretty much the same as being a bartender. The difference is I serve people marijuana. People come in for multiple reasons, either recreational or medical. I have to try to help them find what they want.
It's late, and Chris is just about to close up the shop.
It was a normal day, and I was starting to wind down the store. We close at midnight, so the hour before, I like, get the floors clean, get the glass clean, make sure stuff's stocked up.
And because of 2 recent robberies at the store, security is top priority.
A couple months prior, a couple guys broke into our shop at 4 o'clock in the morning with a sledgehammer. Just cleaned us out. They took probably close to $15,000 to $20,000 worth of product. And then a couple days before Valentine's Day, they came in about 11 o'clock in the morning and held up the morning bud tender. But our shop wasn't the only one being hit at the time.
Multiple dispensaries in the area are also targeted.
Because marijuana isn't legalized across the country, dispensaries can't drop their money off at most banks. Banks are federally regulated, so they unfortunately have a lot of cash on hand. This can make them a huge target for robbers.
We have close to $1 million worth of inventory.
So the robbers, all they have to do is clear the shelves. It wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility that there's someone casing the joint and figuring out what to take from the store to make the most money. Dispensaries being what they are and having as much cash and product on hand, it's also common for them to have quite a few cameras around to capture whatever might happen.
So Chris keeps a close eye on the security monitors.
We have so many cameras around the place, it's unreal. Almost like a casino.
Suddenly, his worst fear becomes reality. He sees 3 men outside the store who are heading straight for him.
I looked into the camera a little bit and it kind of was like, what are these guys doing? And then all of a sudden, the guys just took off in a dead run. And I kind of froze for a second, for like 3 or 4 seconds, and then the door came barreling open, and they had the gun up.
The robbers burst into the dispensary, and almost immediately, one of them points a gun at Chris.
They were concentrating on telling me to open the register, open the register, open the register.
They know exactly what they're here for. Having a gun pointed in your face is one of the scariest things that can happen to you. A lot of times our adrenaline kicks in, but we freeze up and don't really know what to do. He maintains his composure while they run around.
Chris is also prepared. He has a wireless alarm button given to him by the store owner for exactly this kind of emergency.
What really caught them off guard is I had an alarm lanyard around my neck, and they seen me push it. They said, he pushed the alarm, let's get out of here.
The thieves think the police are coming, but to Chris's horror, it seems the alarm has malfunctioned.
Nothing happened. So they stopped and came back.
And these robbers waste no time. One orders Chris to empty the register, while another stuffs all the products he can grab into a bag.
He took his glasses off and set them down on my chair that was next to my register and left them there. And he grabbed his bag, opened it up, and tried to start shoving stuff into the bag.
But that's when Chris sees an opportunity.
The guy that was getting on the wall, he had the gun in his hand, but he couldn't hold the bag and the gun and pull stuff off the wall. So he put the gun in his waistband. I was waiting for my time to get in there. When he put the gun away, that's when I took action. was me or them.
As Chris tries to figure out how to stop the robbers, he remembers something.
I have bear spray located all over the store.
Marijuana dispensaries are prohibited from having guns on the premises. So what do? They have baseball bats or bear mace.
Bear spray is non-lethal, but if it takes a bear down, it's going to take a grown man down.
So Chris makes a bold, calculated move.
If you do a play-by-play on the video, you'll see me standing at the register, and it's a verti desk, so it raises up and down. So underneath of it, I have bear spray. I look over at the other guy, and you see me just grab it and just very calmly just open it like I was opening up a bottle of Coca-Cola.
He stays calm, cool, and collected.
And I just started going to town on the guy.
He goes after one on the right side, and before the guy on the left even knows what's happening, he's already turned his sights on him. These guys are completely engulfed in this thick cloud of bear mace.
I kept my finger on the trigger and did a fanning motion. I just sprayed the guy coming on my left, and I came to the guy on the right, and then the other guy was trying to get out the door.
Now, all three robbers just want to get out of the store and away from Chris.
Bear spray can cause significant swelling of the nasal passages. It can cause trouble breathing, which can bring on panic. It can cause your eyes to shut uncontrollably. People are fumbling around, they can't see.
The key ingredient of bear mace is something found in chili peppers. It causes involuntary eye closure and then respiratory issues to stop aggressive behavior.
And it burns horribly.
But it works.
All three of the guys are struggling to get out of here at this point. We see them frantically knock things over while they're trying to get out. None of them want anything to do with it.
If you ever watched Looney Tunes or cartoons, it was just like what you see in a cartoon. They scattered like no other's business. They couldn't even get the door open fast enough. I mean, they were knocking stuff down. They were hysterical because I got the guy right square in the face.
Finally, they get the door open, making a desperate run for it with thousands of dollars worth of merchandise. Chris immediately calls the police. When they arrive, they find important clues. In their rush to escape, the suspects leave key evidence, including sunglasses and a cell phone. And everything is caught on camera.
One of the good things about this having occurred at a marijuana dispensary was that there was video. That video was posted on social media.
Posting the video leads to a flood of tips. But to Chris's surprise, it also turns him into somewhat of a local celebrity.
Crazy video shows the moments when robbers were stopped in their tracks. A store employee used bear spray to chase them out of an Everett pot shop.
I was very surprised. My favorite newscaster said my full name, and I was just like, that was the best part of the whole ordeal.
Still, Chris is modest about what he did.
It was lots of praise, and you're a hero, I'm glad you did that. And, it's not a hero thing to do. It's just, I was protecting myself and protecting what is ours.
A few months after the robbery, authorities arrest the three men seen in the video, who were all in their early 20s, and charge them with first-degree robbery.
For them to target us like that, it's just like, shame on you. They got away with it, twice, and then the third time, it just didn't work out for them.
Police say the suspects are likely connected to the string of robberies at other local dispensaries. The arrests bring Chris some much-needed stress relief, but going back to work has still been hard.
To be honest with you, I didn't want to come back. I really didn't. But the thing is the owner of the shop and I were pretty close friends. We've been friends for over 8 years.
And Chris knows that his quick-thinking bear mace tactic prevented things from being a lot worse.
Fighting back against a robbery doesn't always have to end up with somebody getting hurt. In this case, Chris, thinking to use bear spray, nobody got hurt, less product was stolen, less cash was stolen, and the outcome was pretty good.
We know they'll never be back at this store. It would be a pretty bold move.
I'm glad that they got caught. I'm sorry that they screwed up the rest of their life. I mean, we do dumb things when we're younger, but, some are dumber than others.
Traffic stop turns terrifying for an Idaho officer.
November 21st, 2016. Lewiston, Idaho. Police are on the hunt for 20-year-old Jesse Harrell.
He has a rap sheet a mile long.
He had multiple warrants for his arrest, 2 for driving without privileges, and then a felony warrant for malicious injury to property, and for a felony aggravated assault where he had actually used a pistol and had assaulted a citizen.
Really just a loose cannon. And so it's very important that this person be apprehended because he was a danger to public safety.
With his criminal patterns, if officers don't catch him, he will escalate.
Police know Jesse is probably armed, but they aren't sure where he is.
The police had a hunch that Jesse might be staying at his mother's house.
Some of the police are assigned to monitor his mom's house, while Officer Woods patrols the streets nearby.
So they actually put a lookout outside the house to keep surveillance on it to figure out whether or not he was staying there.
When the officers are casing this house, they want to see who's coming and going, is there heavy traffic, and most importantly, is Jesse there?
At one point, something catches their attention.
They see a green car pull out of the driveway of this house, and their first instinct is to wonder, is Jesse inside?
So they send Officer Woods to go check it out.
Officer Woods knows the car. It belongs to Jesse's mother, Angelia.
I pulled the car over a week before for the no registration, and I knew that his mother was driving the vehicle.
So now he tries to quickly and strategically force Angelia to stop.
I tried to get into a position where I'd be able to catch up to the vehicle and make a traffic stop. And I immediately turned my emergency lights on.
But that's when things start to get weird. Angelia ignores the lights and keeps driving.
In my experience, people that do this don't want you to see whatever they're concealing.
What is Angelia hiding?
Finally, after driving for several blocks, Angelia pulls over, and with his dash cam rolling, Officer Woods approaches the car.
When I confronted her about having no registration, she stated that she was headed to her dad's house to get money so that she could register the car the next day.
But then there's a strange noise.
A thump in the back of the car.
He hears what seems to be a sound coming from the trunk and realizes this is not going to be your average traffic stop.
The minute he hears that noise, he knows somebody's in the trunk.
I looked at Angelia and I said, "Is Jesse in the car?"
As soon as he asks, Angelia knows the gig is up. She lets the officer know that he's indeed in the trunk.
But that's not all. She says Jesse is armed.
She said, "It's a toy gun, don't shoot him." I became obviously very concerned. I get on my radio.
446, I need you here immediately.
Is she telling the truth, or is she just trying to scare him off?
I didn't believe her.
Angelia has already been deceptive to police just by keeping Jesse in the trunk. So when she says it's a toy gun, why should we believe her?
It's kind of weird that this grown man would be in the trunk of a car with a toy gun. Very, very suspicious. Now, this really escalates the situation.
Toy gun or real gun, the officer has no idea, but a gun is a gun.
And now this officer has a really tough decision to make.
But Officer Woods knows he has one advantage.
If he's in the trunk, if he had an actual gun, he's gonna have a lot harder time finding me to shoot me if he can't see me.
And Woods is also hoping Jesse thinks about how risky it would be to try and fire a gun.
It's pretty common knowledge that if you have a gun and lift it towards an officer, there's a chance they could use deadly force. This kind of gave him the chance to approach the situation without having to think of deadly force first.
And that's when Jesse makes an unexpected move.
Heard the latch go.
Trunk just sort of pops open. His heart begins to race.
To Officer Wood's surprise, Jesse suddenly pops out of the trunk after activating an inside latch.
The special latch to help you get out in case something bad happens, like you get kidnapped. But in this situation, our guy uses it to pop out of the trunk.
Now, he is in a battle to restrain Jesse because he does have a gun.
He sees Jesse with the gun in hand and he realizes he's got to act quick just in case it might be real.
Was he going to attack me, or was he going to try to run away?
It's a dangerous struggle.
When I reach over and grab the edge of the trunk trying to hold the lid down, it's wet. So when I lean on it, I actually slip off the back of the trunk and kind of go across the back of the vehicle. I catch my balance, and by this time, he's opening up the trunk, and I grabbed it and I tried to shut him back into it to hold him in the trunk.
Jesse won't stay put, but Officer Woods realizes the gun is indeed a toy.
The gun he had hits the top of the trunk, and when it did that, I heard the sound of it, and it was plastic. I was confident enough that it was a toy gun.
So this officer makes a bold move. He leans into Jesse, he kind of wraps him up with his arms, sort of tackling him, and then he takes him to the pavement.
He has no idea if there's other weapons, or what if Jesse's mom tries to defend her son any way she can.
Jesse's mom begs Officer Woods not to arrest him.
And, to not hurt him, she was concerned that he was going to get hurt. She was pretty excited.
Angelia was probably just trying to protect her son, but concealing a felon with active warrants, never a good idea. Sometimes a mother's love is unconditional and unlawful.
Thankfully, backup arrives quickly. They're able to fully detain Jesse, and they arrest the mom. And this situation is under control.
The second officer shows up. We roll Jesse onto his stomach, handcuff him, basically pick him up and take him to the front of my patrol car.
In addition to the toy gun, police find a knife on Jesse, and both he and his mom are charged.
We charged him with obstructing an officer, battery assault on an officer, and a concealed dangerous weapon. And Angelia was charged with accessory to a crime, possession of a controlled substance, and paraphernalia.
The dashcam video of the wild traffic stop earns Officer Woods widespread praise.
Once the police chief viewed the video of this incident, he was extremely proud of Officer Woods. He believed that he acted in an exemplary manner in an incredibly tough, incredibly volatile situation, and everyone went home alive.
My chief at the time had seen the video, and he was very upbeat on how we handled the traffic stop, and he released it to the public.
Traffic stop turns terrifying for an Idaho officer when a suspect pops out of the trunk with a gun.
And soon, the video goes viral.
One reason people have found this video fascinating is just the fact that this is a mother and a son. Highly unusual to have a fugitive son that you're harboring in the trunk of your car. And furthermore, once Jesse is outed, once they realize he's in the trunk of the car, he doesn't just lay down and accept it, he fights back. And thankfully, we had this officer to get this dangerous person detained, under control, and behind bars.
I'm very glad it turned out the way it did.
Woods is overwhelmed by the response.
A lot of the people in the community I've known most of my life saying good job or congratulations, and it's nice.
But he insists he was just doing what he is supposed to do.
A nice happy ending for our officer in this scary situation.
For me, it's just doing my job and making sure that I keep vigilant and keep myself safe and the community safe.
In Alabama, another startling crime also has police searching in the night. December 31st, 2015, 11 p.m., near Birmingham, Alabama. Danielle Yancey and her husband are celebrating New Year's Eve at home.
Usually we stay in on New Year's Eve just because of our dogs. We go to like an early dinner, come home, and just chill out. So I was in the back in our bedroom watching a movie, and my husband was in another room watching football on TV.
But before the clock strikes midnight, their quiet evening takes a terrifying turn.
Close to 11 o'clock, my husband comes running down the hallway yelling, and he was like, "Come here, come here." And I paused the movie, got up, and I was like, "What's going on?" And he's like, "There's a naked guy in our breezeway." Had no idea what was happening and didn't believe him. And he said, "Check the security camera."
Danielle sees a mystery man on their doorbell camera. And to her horror, he is nude, wearing nothing but a sock and a Ronald Reagan mask.
First of all, who does that? Who runs around naked with a Ronald Reagan mask? You have someone crawling around the outside of your house at night, naked. That's frightening.
It was someone that was naked. He had a mask on, a presidential mask, and he was kind of covered on his private part with a sock, and kind of kneeling down and looking in the windows. It just immediately gave me chills because it was very creepy.
I'm not really sure what's more disturbing here, a naked man running up to a house, or the naked man is wearing a Ronald Reagan mask.
Still, even if they're tempted to laugh, Danielle and her husband know this could be very serious.
You don't know at what point does it go from just being weird to being dangerous. What were his intentions? Who else was with him? A lot of these videos, we see one person. Is there more than one person involved? Where are they? What are they maybe armed with?
I wonder if he had a gun. I know he's naked, but it could have been behind the breezeway wall and could have pulled it out. You get nervous about what ifs, what this person was going to do next. There was concern that it could have been someone that was actually a peeping Tom in our neighborhood. There were so many what ifs about this that I didn't know which way it was going to be.
Could he have been someone that wanted to kidnap her? Or are they a stalker?
For Danielle, it's a real fear. At the time, her life was very public because she was a reality TV star on the Bravo show Jersey Belle.
I'm a kick-ass publicist from Jersey that married the man of my dreams and wound up living in Mountain Brook, Alabama.
And this wouldn't be the first time her celebrity status had resulted in unwelcomed negative attention.
People would drive up, knock on my door, look in the windows. So it was a little creepy, just, as a public figure, of course, I knew that was part of it.
Celebrities tend to be magnets for weirdos. Unfortunately, a lot of celebrities are the victims of things like this.
And this time, Danielle's husband isn't interested in taking any chances.
It caused her husband to come out and confront this person.
My husband went out the door and tried to run after him.
If someone is willing to do something like that, what else are they willing to do?
Danielle's husband races after the intruder, but can't find him.
The guy, he panicked and ran down the street.
Now, the couple is scared.
My husband came back in the back door and came down the hallway running and yelling at me, "Danielle, Danielle." So that's when we immediately called the police to have them come out and look and make sure somebody wasn't still near our house or coming back.
When the police arrive, they comb the neighborhood looking for the nude man. But because of his mask, they aren't even sure who they're looking for.
In a case like this, we would hope that there would be additional video that might show the person before they put the mask on and before they come disrobed. And potentially if they're driving a vehicle, if we can get a description of the vehicle or the license plate.
They don't find any additional video. But it's only 40 degrees outside, so police don't think the man can get far without his clothes. Who is he? And where has he gone?
The police just said, we will do whatever we can to make sure y'all are safe.
The next morning, Danielle decides to help police by posting the doorbell footage on social media.
I posted it firstly on our neighborhood group, just to be aware that there's someone out there that possibly could come by their house, and on a public page of mine on Facebook and also on my Instagram.
Danielle tries to make light of things with captions like, "Interesting night in. Thank you, naked boy." But for the next few days, she's shaken.
I don't even want to leave my house. I mean, every time I was looking over my shoulder to see if anybody was around my car, worried that somebody would jump out behind my car.
Neighbors and fans are also worried.
A lot of women obviously follow me, and they were all concerned. "Danielle, please be careful." And we had multiple people stopping by. "Thank you so much for, posting this in our neighborhood so that we're aware. Have you had any updates? We're very concerned still." And we had this guy that stopped by and said, "I just want to show you this paperwork of a court date that's coming up. It's about a naked peeping Tom in our neighborhood that was arrested. He's not in jail right now, so he could have come back." So at that point, I got chills again. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so scared now.
Still, not all of the responses Danielle receives are supportive. Some people suggest that the whole story is a big, well-orchestrated fake.
That you have someone who's looking to make a bigger name for herself, because reality stars are looking for their 15 minutes and then another 15 minutes of fame.
The rumors infuriate Danielle.
That was just so far-fetched to say that it was a publicity stunt. It's something that I would never do.
Despite the naysayers, it takes no time before the video goes viral.
Captured on surveillance video outside their house,
wearing only a Ronald Reagan mask.
And a few days later, Danielle and her husband get the break they were hoping for when a neighbor knocks on their door.
He said, "I actually know who did this, and it's nothing to be afraid of going forward."
The man tells Danielle that the intruder is actually just an embarrassed teenage boy from the neighborhood, a kid who got carried away with some friends. Danielle gives the information to police, but because he's underage, they don't release the suspect's name to the public.
We find out that this is a prank. It's a stupid prank.
I guess the boys decided to pull this prank on New Year's Eve and thought it would be funny.
But neither Danielle or authorities are amused by the prank. Because joke or not, the reality is it could have resulted in dire consequences.
Because of the danger potential. Alabama is what's referred to as a castle doctrine state, which basically means if the homeowners in Alabama feel threatened by someone who enters their property, and if they have firearms, they may end up shooting the person. That is a very potentially violent and deadly situation that could very well have ended very tragically for the prankster.
There was a couple of guys that stopped by and they were like, "Well, if he'd come on our property, I might have shot him."
On Facebook, Danielle writes a long, grateful post to inform everyone that the mystery man has been identified. But she and her husband decide not to press charges.
This young man could have been facing a number of charges, including public lewdness, stalking, and things of that nature.
I don't think, he realized we had cameras.
Still, Danielle isn't about to let him totally off the hook. She doesn't name him, but in public posts on her social media, she lets him know just how thoughtless his actions were.
I know it's a funny prank, but with a mask on like that, it is super scary. And I just wanted to let you know to be careful because it could have been a lot scarier than you think.
And Danielle's message does not fall on deaf ears.
A few days later, this high school boy came over with his father. He did say they were playing cards, and for some reason they have presidential masks when they were playing cards, and somebody had an idea to go knock on someone's door nude. I was a little bit mad. Why did they choose our house, and was it targeted to us? And he said, "No, ma'am, this was just a house that was, at the corner and all your lights are on." And he just said, I'm so sorry for pulling this prank.
Now, both Danielle and police hope the incident serves as a warning.
It could have ended a lot worse than it did.
This was a situation that could have gone very differently if he had gone to just a few houses down the road from us.
The lessons are here is just to kind of be mindful of what you're doing. I mean, we were all teenagers once.
No one noticed the fingerprint at first. It sat there, faint and partial, pressed into the dried blood at the edge of the kitchen counter, half smeared as if the person who left it had hesitated, had paused, had almost thought better of being there. In 1985, it was logged, photographed once under harsh fluorescent light, then buried in a manila folder that would not be opened again for nearly 4 decades. In Illinois, that night would become a cold case before anyone realized it was already freezing. The house stood on a quiet street where porch lights flickered on at dusk and neighbors recognized each other's cars by sound alone. Maplewood Drive had no reputation for violence, no history of screams cutting through the evening air. Yet on an October morning, police tape fluttered between 2 oak trees, and the front door of number 417 hung open, splintered near the lock, as if the house itself had tried to resist what came next. Inside, the air was wrong. Too still. Too clean in some places, violently disturbed in others. A chair overturned near the kitchen table. A coffee mug shattered on the linoleum floor. And at the center of it all, just out of view from the hallway, lay the body of Margaret Hensley, 37 years old, mother of 2, bookkeeper at a local manufacturing plant. Known in the neighborhood for her meticulous rose garden and the way she waved to passing cars every morning at precisely 7:12 a.m. She had not waved that morning. The first officer on scene would later say the silence unsettled him more than the blood. There were no signs of prolonged struggle, no ransacked drawers, no obvious theft. It looked fast. Decisive. Personal. Margaret had been struck once, hard enough to end everything before she could scream. Her watch had stopped at 9:43 p.m. the night before. Dinner sat half-prepared on the counter, vegetables sliced with careful, even cuts, as if she expected someone home soon. But no one came. By noon, the street was packed with squad cars, unmarked sedans, men in jackets with badges clipped to their belts. Neighbors clustered behind yellow tape, whispering the same stunned phrase over and over again. This doesn't happen here. Illinois had its share of crime, but this felt different. This felt like something had slipped through a crack in reality and left a body behind. Margaret's husband, Thomas Hensley, was out of town on business in Peoria. Receipts confirmed it. Hotel clerks remembered him. Security cameras caught him checking out early that morning, his face pale, his tie loosened, eyes fixed on something far away as if he already knew his life had split into before and after. Investigators questioned him for hours. They found nothing that would hold. No motive. No history of violence. No insurance windfall waiting quietly in the background. The children were asleep upstairs when it happened. They heard nothing. That detail would haunt the case for years. Detectives combed the house inch by inch. They dusted for prints, bagged fibers, scraped beneath fingernails. They documented the scuff near the back door, the muddy footprint just outside the threshold that didn't quite match any shoe in the house. The fingerprint on the counter was noted but incomplete, its ridges distorted by blood and motion. In 1985, databases were thin. Partial prints were frustrating at best, useless at worst. Still, they tried. They ran the print against known offenders in the county. Nothing. They expanded the search to neighboring jurisdictions. Still nothing. The print was filed away, labeled, forgotten. One more ghost in a growing archive of unanswered questions. The community demanded answers. The police promised progress. And then the trail began to fade. A neighbor claimed to have seen a dark sedan idling near the house around 9:30 p.m. Another reported a man walking quickly down the block, hands in his pockets, head down. Descriptions conflicted. Timelines blurred. Memories shifted as weeks turned into months. No one could say for certain what they saw, only what they felt now: fear, suspicion, and the creeping realization that whoever did this might still be close. Too close. Margaret's name appeared in headlines for a while. Suburban Illinois murder shocks quiet community. Mother of 2 slain in own home. Candlelight vigils were held. Church pews filled. Then, slowly, the story slipped from the front page to the back, from the back to a single paragraph, from a paragraph to silence. The investigation stalled. Leads dried up. Detectives were reassigned. A new generation of officers took over desks that still held the dust of old files. The case went cold. Years passed. The Hensley children grew up under the weight of a question no one could answer. Thomas sold the house. The rose garden withered. New families moved into Maplewood Drive, unaware that their driveways crossed a line that once separated the living from the dead. The fingerprint slept in a cardboard box, untouched, unimportant, a relic of a time before anyone imagined it would matter again. But cold cases have a way of waiting. They do not disappear. They settle. They harden. In the late 2010s, a young detective named Aaron Cole was assigned to review unsolved homicides from the 1980s. It was administrative work, quiet and unglamorous. Most files led nowhere. Some were missing evidence entirely. Others ended with handwritten notes that read simply, "No further leads." Margaret Hensley's folder was thick, organized, and heartbreakingly thorough. Cole noticed the fingerprint reference almost immediately. Partial latent print. Collected from kitchen counter. Never matched. Technology had changed. Databases had grown. Algorithms could now extract usable data from fragments once deemed worthless. Cole pulled the print from storage, scanned it, enhanced it digitally. What emerged was faint but distinct enough to try again. This time, the system paused. Then it returned a hit. A name surfaced, not from 1985, but from a 2003 arrest in another state. The match was not perfect, but it was strong enough to demand attention. The man had never lived in Illinois, at least not officially. He had no known connection to Margaret Hensley. And yet, his fingerprint aligned with the ghost left on that kitchen counter. Cole stared at the screen longer than he should have. After 35 years, the case was breathing again. But breath does not mean life. And a name does not mean truth. Because as the investigation reopened, as headlines began whispering the phrase, "Illinois 1985 cold case cracked," questions multiplied faster than answers. Why was this man never on any radar before? How did he cross paths with Margaret Hensley? And most unsettling of all, if the fingerprint was real, why had it waited so long to reveal itself? The arrest would come later. The shock would follow. But in that moment, in a quiet evidence room filled with the echoes of forgotten crimes, one thing was suddenly clear. The past was not finished. And the fingerprint had been waiting. The name on the screen did not feel real at first. It hovered there, sterile and modern, surrounded by metadata and timestamps that belonged to another era entirely. Detective Aaron Cole printed the report and read it again, slower this time, letting each line sink in as if repetition might force it to make sense. The fingerprint from a dead woman's kitchen in 1985 was now pointing to a man who had been 22 years old at the time, a man whose life had unfolded quietly for decades without anyone connecting him to a suburban Illinois murder. Daniel Mercer. No middle name. No dramatic criminal record from the 80s. No Illinois address during that year, at least not one that showed up in any obvious database. Just a thin trail of arrests in the early 2000s for burglary and assault in Indiana, followed by long stretches of nothing. Marriage. Divorce. Construction work. A life that looked ordinary enough to disappear into the background noise of America. Cole felt the familiar tightening in his chest that came whenever a cold case stirred. This was the moment where hope and danger overlapped, where the promise of resolution could just as easily collapse into another dead end. He pulled Margaret Hensley's file closer, spreading photographs across the desk. The kitchen. The counter. The faint smear where the fingerprint had been lifted. He imagined Daniel Mercer's hand there, warm, alive, pressing into blood that was not yet cold. But imagination was not evidence. Not yet. Cole began rebuilding the timeline from the ground up. October 14, 1985. Margaret was last seen at 6:18 p.m., leaving the grocery store on Main Street. A cashier remembered her clearly, neat hair, calm demeanor, no sign of distress. At 7:40 p.m., a neighbor heard the sound of a car door slam. At 9:43 p.m., Margaret's watch stopped. Everything between those moments was a void investigators had never been able to fill. Cole searched Mercer's history for any thread that could bridge that gap. In 1985, Mercer was drifting. No fixed address. He worked seasonal jobs, construction mostly, sometimes under the table. He had family in Indiana, friends scattered across the Midwest. Nothing placed him in Illinois that autumn. Nothing, except the print. The fingerprint did not lie, but it also did not explain itself. Cole requested old employment records from factories, warehouses, and contracting companies within a 50-mile radius of Maplewood Drive. He cross-checked names, dates, payrolls yellowed with age. It was tedious work, the kind that breaks momentum and patience alike. Weeks passed. Then a name surfaced in a box of microfilm records from a defunct home renovation company based just outside Chicago. Mercer, Daniel. Temporary laborer. September, October 1985. The address listed was a shared house on the edge of town, less than 10 miles from Margaret Hensley's home. Cole leaned back in his chair, heart thudding. The distance was suddenly small enough to matter. He dug deeper. The renovation company had serviced several homes in Margaret's neighborhood that year, including routine roof repairs and kitchen upgrades. There was no invoice for work at number 417, Maplewood Drive, but that didn't mean Mercer had never been there. Temporary workers came and went. Records were sloppy. Doors were left open. Opportunity began to take shape. Cole contacted the original lead detective, now retired and living in Florida. The man's voice was tired but sharp when Cole mentioned the fingerprint. He remembered it instantly. Remembered the frustration. Remembered arguing with supervisors who had wanted to prioritize cases with real suspects. Technology just wasn't there yet, he said. We did what we could. Cole believed him. And still, belief did not change the past. The next step was witnesses, or what remained of them. Many had died. Others had moved on, their memories dulled by time. Cole tracked down the neighbor who had reported the idling sedan. The man was in his 70s now, his hands shaking as he held a cup of coffee. He could no longer describe the driver's face, but he remembered the car clearly, a dull blue, older model, rust along the rear wheel well. Mercer owned a blue 1978 Ford LTD in 1985. It was a small detail. It was also another coincidence that refused to be ignored. Cole requested Mercer's full file. Mugshots from the 2000s stared back at him, a man with narrow eyes, a jaw set in perpetual tension, the kind of face that gave nothing away. In one photo, Mercer had a bandage across his right hand. Assault arrest. Bar fight. The report mentioned a habit of clenching his fists when nervous. Cole thought of the fingerprint again. The pressure. The smear. He flew to Indiana to speak with Mercer's ex-wife, a woman who had long since rebuilt her life and wanted nothing to do with the past. At first, she refused. Then she paused when Cole mentioned the year 1985. Her expression changed, subtle but unmistakable. She said Mercer had once told her about a bad night from his youth, something he never explained but returned to in his drinking, always with the same words. "I was there. I shouldn't have been there." She never asked what he meant. She never pushed. People learn quickly what questions not to ask. Back in Illinois, Cole stood in Margaret Hensley's old neighborhood, now quieter than ever. The house at 417 Maplewood Drive had been renovated twice since the murder. New counters. New floors. The past buried under layers of improvement. Cole closed his eyes and tried to hear the sounds from that night, a door opening, a footstep, a voice raised in surprise. Why had Mercer gone there? Financial records offered one possibility. Margaret had balanced books for several small businesses. She handled cash occasionally. Nothing suggested she had large sums at home, but rumors had circulated after her death, whispers of envelopes, side work, money unaccounted for. None of it had ever been proven. Still, robbery gone wrong was a theory that had never fully died. Cole found something else while reviewing old interview transcripts. Margaret had mentioned a strange man to a coworker days before her death. Someone who had knocked on her door asking about renovation work in the area. She had thought nothing of it at the time. The description was vague. Average height. Dark hair. Nervous energy. Temporary laborer. No uniform. No record. The pieces were aligning, but alignment was not certainty. Cole knew the danger of confirmation bias, the ease with which a reopened case could be bent to fit a narrative. He needed something more. Something Mercer could not explain away. He requested a DNA comparison. The evidence was limited, degraded by time, but technology had improved there too. A hair fragment recovered from Margaret's kitchen floor had never been tested properly. The results came back inconclusive, but not excluding Mercer. Another almost. Pressure mounted quietly. The department approved surveillance. Mercer was living alone now, working maintenance at an apartment complex. His routine was simple. Predictable. He drank at the same bar on Fridays. He avoided eye contact. He did not talk about his past. When detectives finally approached him, they did not mention Margaret Hensley. They asked about his work history. His time in Illinois. Mercer answered calmly at first. Then his jaw tightened. His right hand clenched. "I was never there," he said. The fingerprint sat between them on the table, printed and enhanced, a ghost-given form. Mercer stared at it for a long time. Too long. His breathing changed. He looked away. "That's not mine," he said again, quieter now. But fingerprints do not forget. They wait. As the interview ended, Cole felt the weight of 35 years pressing forward, demanding resolution. The case that had frozen in 1985 was moving again, cracking open under the strain of new eyes and old truths. Somewhere between the kitchen counter and the present moment, a line had finally been drawn. And Daniel Mercer was standing on the wrong side of it. Silence followed Mercer out of the interview room like a shadow that refused to detach itself. The door closed softly behind him, but the echo lingered, bouncing between concrete walls and the tired eyes of detectives who had seen this moment fail too many times before. Aaron Cole did not speak right away. He stood there, staring at the table where the fingerprint lay, its ridges magnified until they looked less like skin and more like a map of decisions made in the dark. Mercer had not confessed. He had not exploded. He had not fled. He had done something worse. He had reacted. Cole replayed the interview in his head, second by second. The tightening jaw. The pause before denial. The way Mercer's gaze slipped sideways when the print appeared, as if some part of him recognized it before his mind caught up. Innocent men were confused. Guilty men were afraid. Mercer had been calculating. The legal clock began ticking the moment Mercer walked out. A fingerprint match alone, even a strong one, was not enough to bring him in. Not after 35 years. Not without context, motive, and corroboration that could survive a courtroom determined to dismantle every assumption. Cole knew this case would be attacked from every angle. Chain of custody. Evidence degradation. Memory contamination. The defense would argue coincidence until the word lost meaning. So Cole went back to the beginning. He returned to the original crime scene photographs, now digitized but no less unsettling. He studied the angle of Margaret's body, the direction of blood spatter, the single blow that ended everything. This was not rage spiraling out of control. This was sudden, decisive, almost practiced. The weapon had never been found. Investigators believed it had been something close at hand, a blunt object lifted in panic. Panic suggested surprise. Margaret had not expected to die that night. She might not have expected danger at all. Cole focused on the kitchen. The counter where the fingerprint waited. The half-prepared meal. Whoever stood there had been close enough to speak, to ask a question, to receive an answer that changed everything. Cole wondered if Mercer had knocked first, if Margaret had opened the door with that same polite caution neighbors remembered so well. He wondered if Mercer had smiled. Another detail emerged from the old files, something overlooked because it had not seemed important at the time. Margaret's phone line had been briefly disconnected earlier that week. A technician had visited the house to restore service. The company records were incomplete, but the service window aligned with Mercer's employment at the renovation company. Cole requested the technician logs. They were barely legible, stored on fading paper that smelled faintly of mildew and neglect. One entry stood out, a subcontracted helper assigned for a single day. The name was abbreviated. D. Mercer. It was not proof. It was proximity. Cole compiled everything into a timeline that refused to stay neat. Mercer in the area. Mercer connected to home services. Mercer's fingerprint in blood. Each point alone was fragile. Together, they began to hold weight. The kind of weight that bends cases toward inevitability. Still, something was missing. The question that had haunted investigators in 1985 returned with renewed force. Why Margaret Hensley? She was not wealthy. She was not involved in crime. She did not live alone. There had to be a trigger, something that turned a routine interaction into a fatal moment. Cole found it in an old bank statement. Margaret had withdrawn a modest sum of cash the afternoon of October 14. Not enough to make headlines, but enough to matter to someone living paycheck to paycheck. The withdrawal had never been connected to the murder because nothing was missing from the house. No drawers emptied. No purse stolen. But the cash was never found. Cole imagined Mercer realizing the money was there, realizing Margaret might refuse to hand it over, realizing how quickly control could slip away. Panic again. The sudden weight of an object. A single, irreversible decision. He needed Mercer to talk. Not to confess, just to fill the silence with enough truth to expose the lies. Cole scheduled a second interview. This time, he brought photos. Not of Margaret's body, but of the house as it had looked in 1985. The street. The porch. The kitchen counter before the blood. He placed them carefully, one by one, watching Mercer's face. "You ever been here?" Cole asked. Mercer hesitated. "No," he said. Cole slid the porch photo closer. "You sure?" Mercer's eyes flickered. He swallowed. His voice was steadier this time, rehearsed. "I worked all over back then," he said. "Doesn't mean I remember every house." Cole nodded, as if agreeing. "Funny thing is," he said quietly, "this house remembers you." Mercer's breathing quickened. The room seemed to shrink around him, walls closing in with the weight of decades. Cole did not raise his voice. He did not accuse. He let the evidence speak in fragments, just enough to unsettle. The fingerprint. The car. The employment record. Mercer leaned back, crossed his arms, retreated into himself. The interview ended with no confession, but Cole had not expected one. What he needed now was leverage, and leverage came from pressure applied everywhere at once. The department moved to obtain an arrest warrant. Prosecutors hesitated. The case was old. The risks were high. One misstep could unravel everything. Cole argued relentlessly, presenting the pattern, the accumulation of details that pointed in one direction only. He reminded them of the fingerprint, the one thing that could not be explained away by fading memory. The warrant was approved. When officers arrived at Mercer's apartment, he did not resist. He watched as they read him his rights, his expression blank, as if this moment had always been waiting somewhere in his future. At the station, the news broke quietly at first, then all at once. Illinois 1985 cold case reopened. Suspect in custody. The community reacted with disbelief. Maplewood Drive resurfaced in headlines, its name pulled from obscurity and thrust back into the public eye. Neighbors who had long since stopped thinking about the murder found themselves remembering details they had buried. The Hensley children, now adults with lives of their own, were notified before the press. They sat in stunned silence, grappling with the idea that the question which had shaped their lives might finally have an answer. Mercer was charged with first-degree murder. The courtroom filled quickly. Reporters lined the back wall. Old photographs of Margaret appeared on screens, her smile frozen in time, untouched by the decades that had passed since her death. The defense attacked immediately, calling the fingerprint unreliable, the investigation contaminated by hindsight. They painted Mercer as a convenient target, a man chosen because technology finally allowed it. But technology did not create the print. It only revealed it. Cole took the stand and described the process, the care taken to preserve evidence, the methods used to enhance the fingerprint without altering it. He spoke of the employment records, the technician logs, the proximity that placed Mercer in Margaret's orbit. The jury listened, their faces unreadable. Mercer watched without expression. Then came the fingerprint expert. She explained ridges and minutiae, probability and exclusion. She spoke of how partial prints could still be unique, how the match exceeded accepted thresholds. She said Mercer's print was not similar. It was identical. The room went quiet. Mercer's lawyer objected, argued, pushed back against the weight of science pressing down on their case. But the seed had been planted. A single touch from 1985 had reached forward, cutting through years of silence to speak now. Still, doubt lingered. Doubt always did. The defense raised a final question that hung heavy in the air. If Mercer killed Margaret, why had he never killed again? Why had his life been so unremarkable? Cole had thought about that question for months. Some crimes are not patterns, he said. They are moments. The jury retired. The waiting began. Outside, snow fell softly on Maplewood Drive, dusting the street where police tape once fluttered in the wind. Inside the courthouse, time seemed to slow, stretching thin as the decades it had taken to reach this point. The verdict would come soon. But even as the doors closed behind the jury, one truth remained undeniable. The fingerprint had done what memory could not. It had survived. The jury room was sealed off from the world, but the weight of it pressed outward anyway, thick enough to be felt in the hallway where reporters whispered and families stared at the floor, counting patterns in the tiles to keep from breaking apart. Inside that room, 12 strangers held 35 years of silence between them, turning it over like a fragile object, afraid that one wrong movement might shatter it beyond repair. Outside, Daniel Mercer sat perfectly still. He did not fidget. He did not pray. He stared straight ahead, as if the wall in front of him might eventually open and let him walk through it. For Aaron Cole, waiting was the most dangerous part. This was where cold cases went to die a second time, undone not by lack of evidence but by uncertainty, by the fear of condemning a man based on the past's incomplete voice. Cole had seen juries hesitate before. He had seen fingerprints dismissed as coincidence, proximity waved away as bad luck. He had learned never to trust momentum. When the jury returned, it was with faces set in rigid lines, their expressions offering nothing. The foreperson stood, hands trembling slightly as she unfolded the paper. The room held its breath. Guilty. The word landed without drama, without flourish. Just a single syllable that cracked through the air and settled into every corner of the courtroom. Margaret Hensley's children closed their eyes. Someone in the back row sobbed quietly. Mercer did not move. The judge thanked the jury. The sentence would come later. But the damage, or the justice, was already done. Headlines exploded within minutes. Illinois 1985 cold case cracked, arrest leads to conviction. Forgotten fingerprint brings killer to justice after 35 years. Community stunned as cold case finally solved. But outside the frame of celebration, outside the clean narrative of resolution, the story began to fracture. Mercer's attorney announced an appeal before the courtroom had even emptied. They would challenge the fingerprint. They would challenge the timeline. They would challenge the very idea that a man could be held responsible for something so old, something that had slept for decades without consequence. The word miscarriage began appearing alongside justice in opinion columns and late-night debates. Cole knew this phase well. Closure was never clean. As Mercer was led away, he finally spoke, his voice low but sharp enough to cut through the noise. "You don't know what happened," he said. Cole met his eyes. There was no anger there. Only something like exhaustion. "Then tell us," Cole said. Mercer looked away. The sentencing hearing brought new details into the light, fragments Mercer's defense could no longer contain. Witnesses testified about his temper in his early 20s, about sudden flashes of violence that disappeared as quickly as they came. An old friend recalled a night in the mid-80s when Mercer showed up drunk and shaken, blood on his sleeve, refusing to explain where it came from. At the time, it had been written off as a bar fight. Now, it sounded different. The judge handed down a life sentence with the possibility of parole decades down the line. Mercer nodded once, as if he had expected nothing else. Cameras flashed. The story crystallized in the public mind, a monster revealed, a community avenged. But cold cases rarely end when the gavel falls. In the months that followed, Cole kept digging, driven by a restlessness he could not quite explain. He reviewed transcripts late at night, reread statements, traced Mercer's movements again and again. Something about the case resisted finality, like a door that refused to stay closed no matter how firmly it was shut. The fingerprint was real. The conviction was real. But motive still felt thin, stretched too tight over too many assumptions. Then a letter arrived. It was postmarked from a correctional facility 3 counties away, written in careful, uneven handwriting. Mercer had requested to speak with Cole alone. No lawyers. No recorders. Just a conversation. Cole agreed. The visiting room smelled of disinfectant and stale coffee. Mercer sat across the table, thinner now, the tension in his face replaced by something colder, heavier. He did not waste time. "I didn't plan to kill her," Mercer said. His voice was flat, stripped of drama. "I didn't even go there for her." Cole said nothing. "She wasn't the target," Mercer continued. "She was just there." The word settled slowly, reshaping everything around them. Mercer described drifting through neighborhoods in 1985, knocking on doors, posing as a laborer, looking for easy opportunities. He talked about Margaret answering the door, about how kind she seemed, how normal everything felt. He talked about stepping inside, about seeing the envelope on the counter, about asking questions he had no right to ask. "She told me to leave," he said. She wasn't scared at first. Just firm. His hand trembled as he spoke, fingers curling unconsciously, replaying muscle memory decades old. "I didn't mean to hit her that hard." The room felt suddenly smaller. Cole pressed him, asked about the weapon, about whether anyone else had been involved. Mercer shook his head. "It was just me." Then he said something that froze Cole in place. "I thought I'd wiped everything." Mercer described washing his hands, scrubbing the counter, leaving in a panic when he heard something upstairs. He had believed the evidence was gone. That belief had carried him for decades, a quiet certainty that allowed him to sleep at night. "I didn't know about the print," he said. "If I had, I don't know." The confession was partial, imperfect, but it aligned with the evidence in ways that no fabrication could. Cole left the facility with a familiar mix of relief and unease. The case was stronger now, but the truth it revealed was uglier, more banal than anyone wanted. There was no grand conspiracy. No cinematic villain. Just a man who made a single violent choice and lived in its shadow. When the confession became public, the narrative shifted again. Sympathy flickered briefly in places it did not belong, then died out under the weight of Margaret's name. The community returned to its routines, satisfied that the past had finally been dealt with. But closure is not the same as peace. Cole visited Maplewood Drive one last time. The house stood quiet, unchanged in its shape if not its substance. He imagined Margaret in the kitchen, the sound of a knife on a cutting board, the ordinary rhythm of a life that should have continued. The fingerprint had spoken, but it had not restored what was lost. Cold cases, Cole realized, were not solved. They were unearthed. And what they revealed was never as clean as the headlines promised. The confession did not end the noise. It amplified it. Once Daniel Mercer's words reached the public, the case mutated again, reshaped by outrage, fascination, and the dangerous comfort of hindsight. Talk shows debated whether justice delayed could still be called justice at all. Editorials praised the power of modern forensics while quietly questioning how many lives had passed under the shadow of a single missed detail. The fingerprint, once invisible, had become a symbol, proof that the past never truly releases its grip. For Aaron Cole, the days after the confession were strangely empty. The adrenaline that had carried him through reopened files and late-night arguments drained away, leaving behind a fatigue that settled deep in his bones. He should have felt finished. Instead, the case lingered, refusing to loosen its hold. Cold cases did that. They stayed. Cole requested one final review of the evidence, not for the court, not for the press, but for himself. He wanted to understand the shape of the thing he had unearthed, the exact moment where Margaret Hensley's ordinary life had intersected with Mercer's quiet desperation. He wanted to know whether anything at all, could have changed the outcome. He returned to the interviews from 1985, listening again to voices recorded on aging cassette tapes. Officers asking the same questions over and over. Neighbors struggling to describe feelings more than facts. Margaret's co-workers speaking of her kindness, her predictability, the way she never locked her door during the day because nothing bad ever happens here. That line echoed now with bitter irony. One tape stopped him cold. It was an interview with a woman who lived 2 houses down from Maplewood Drive, conducted 3 days after the murder. At the time, her statement had been deemed irrelevant. Now, it sounded different. She said she had heard a noise around 9:30 that night. Not a scream. Not a crash. Just a sharp, sudden sound, like something heavy striking wood. She had assumed it was construction debris being moved next door. She had gone back to watching television. Cole closed his eyes. A single sound. A single moment. That was all it had taken. The community of Maplewood Drive absorbed the truth slowly, like a bruise darkening over time. Some neighbors attended the sentencing hearing out of obligation, others out of curiosity, others because they had lived too long with the unease to stay away. They spoke quietly among themselves, recalling how they had once checked their locks twice, how they had watched strangers with narrowed eyes. The house at number 417 became a point of pilgrimage for a brief, uncomfortable moment. People drove by, slowed down, stared. Some left flowers on the sidewalk. Others shook their heads and kept moving, unwilling to invite the past into their present. Margaret's children issued a short statement. They thanked law enforcement. They asked for privacy. They said nothing about forgiveness. They did not need to. Cole understood that silence better than words. He met with the original detectives again, the men who had worked the case when their hair was darker and their optimism less guarded. They spoke candidly now, free from the need to defend decisions made under different constraints. They admitted their frustration, their guilt. One of them confessed that he had thought about the fingerprint many times over the years. I knew it meant something, the man said. I just didn't know how to prove it. Cole did not blame them. The tools had not existed. The databases had not been built. The world had been slower, less connected, more forgiving of uncertainty. Blame felt pointless now. What mattered was what the case revealed about time. Mercer settled into prison life with unsettling ease. He kept to himself. He worked in the library. He avoided attention. Guards reported that he slept deeply, without the insomnia that plagued many inmates. It was as if the arrest had lifted a weight he had carried so long he no longer recognized it as burden. That detail troubled Cole more than anything else. He requested one last meeting with Mercer, not to interrogate, not to extract more confession, but to understand the man who had lived freely for decades while a family mourned. Mercer agreed. This time, there was no table between them, no mirrored glass. Just two chairs in a quiet room. Mercer looked older now, not just from age but from exposure, from the way confinement stripped away illusion. You ever think about her? Cole asked. Mercer nodded slowly. Every day, he said. Not how you think. Not her face. Just the sound. The way everything stopped. Cole waited. I thought time would erase it, Mercer continued. I thought if I lived quietly enough, it would fade. But it didn't. It just waited. Cole felt the truth of that settle into his chest. Why didn't you turn yourself in? He asked. Mercer's mouth tightened. Because nothing made me do it again, he said. And that made it easier to pretend it wasn't real. Cole left the facility knowing he would never fully understand that logic, and knowing it did not matter. Understanding was not justice. It was simply another form of witnessing. As the case faded from headlines, it left behind ripples that extended beyond Maplewood Drive. Other departments began reviewing their cold cases with renewed urgency. Old fingerprints were pulled from storage. Partial DNA samples were re-examined. The idea that one overlooked detail could one day speak again sent a quiet shock through law enforcement communities across the state. Not every case would be solved. Most would not. But the silence felt less absolute now. Cole returned to his office and closed the Margaret Hensley file for what he told himself was the last time. He labeled it clearly. Solved. Conviction. Confession. The words felt heavy, insufficient, but necessary. Late that evening, he stepped outside into the cold Illinois air. The sky was low and gray, the kind of sky that pressed down on the landscape and made everything feel closer, more immediate. He thought of the fingerprint again, the ridges formed before Mercer was born, the skin that carried identity without intention. A fingerprint did not know it would become evidence. It did not choose its moment. It simply existed, waiting for someone to listen. In Maplewood Drive, life continued. Children played in yards where fear once lingered. Porch lights flicked on at dusk. Doors locked and unlocked with habitual motions learned long ago. Margaret Hensley's name slipped back into private memory, carried quietly by those who loved her and those who would never forget the cost of one unanswered question. The case was closed. But its echo remained. Because in the end, the most unsettling truth was not that a fingerprint had solved a murder after 35 years. It was that it had been there all along. Time did not stop when the file was closed. It never did. For the rest of the world, the Illinois 1985 cold case became a completed story, a headline archived, a brief surge of attention that slowly dissolved into background noise. For Aaron Cole, it became something quieter and more invasive, a presence that followed him into other investigations, into late nights and early mornings, into moments where the silence felt too deliberate to ignore. He began noticing fingerprints everywhere. On coffee cups left behind in interview rooms. On door handles polished smooth by decades of touch. On glass evidence lockers where old cases slept side by side, each sealed with the quiet assumption that their time had passed. Cole could no longer see them as neutral marks. Every ridge felt like a sentence waiting to be spoken. The Hensley case had done that to him. It had changed the way he listened. Requests began arriving from other departments, informal at first, then insistent. Detectives wanted to know how the fingerprint had been enhanced, what software had been used, which thresholds had convinced prosecutors to move forward. Cole shared everything. He did not guard the process. This case was never meant to be singular. Boxes were pulled from basements. Evidence rooms stirred. One afternoon, a call came from a small town 3 hours south. A homicide from 1982. A woman found dead near a riverbank. No witnesses. No suspects. A partial print recovered from a beer bottle, dismissed decades ago as unusable. Could Cole take a look? He could. The work was familiar now, methodical, stripped of illusion. He scanned. He adjusted contrast. He waited. The system returned nothing. No match. Just silence. Cole felt a strange relief. Not every ghost wanted to speak. Meanwhile, the Mercer appeal moved forward, slow and grinding. Defense attorneys leaned hard on the age of the evidence, arguing that time itself was contamination. Memories faded. Standards evolved. What had once been acceptable science might no longer be reliable. They called experts who spoke in careful language, sowing doubt without committing to contradiction. The state countered with consistency. The fingerprint analysis had followed current standards. The chain of custody was intact. Mercer's own words, his partial confession, his unprompted acknowledgement of wiping the counter, filled the gaps that time had tried to erode. In court, Mercer sat through it all with the same stillness, as if the outcome no longer belonged to him. When the appeal was denied, it barely made the news. Closure rarely did. Margaret Hensley's children visited the cemetery together for the first time since the conviction. They stood side by side, adults now, their lives marked by paths taken without guidance they should have had. They did not speak much. They did not need to. The stone did not change. The ground did not give anything back. But something had shifted. The unanswered question no longer hovered between them like a third presence. The space it left behind was unfamiliar, awkward, but real. Grief, once frozen in uncertainty, began to thaw into something heavier and more honest. Cole never attended that visit. Some distances mattered. Instead, he found himself thinking about the moment before the fingerprint was made. The fraction of a second when Mercer's hand pressed down, when blood was still warm, when the future had not yet hardened into inevitability. That moment carried more weight now than the violence itself. Because it was a moment of contact. Two lives intersecting. One ending. One continuing. The case began appearing in training seminars, in presentations about the value of preserving evidence, about patience, about humility before time. Young officers listened wide-eyed, some inspired, some unsettled. Cole emphasized one point again and again. Cold cases are not failures, he said. They are conversations paused. But conversations could be resumed. Late one evening, as Cole prepared to leave the office, he noticed a file left open on a desk nearby. Another unsolved homicide. Another partial print. Another life waiting in suspension. He closed the file gently, as if not to wake it too soon. Outside, winter settled over Illinois again. Snow softened edges, erased footprints almost as soon as they appeared. Cole watched his own tracks fade as he crossed the parking lot, thinking about how easily presence could vanish, how little it took to leave no visible trace. Fingerprints were different. They resisted erasure. They clung. In prison, Mercer received a letter from a man he did not recognize. It was short, anonymous, written in block letters. It contained no threats, no forgiveness, just a single sentence. You didn't get away with it. Mercer read it once, folded it carefully, and placed it inside a book. He did not react. He had lived too long with worse knowledge to be shaken now. At night, he dreamed of kitchens. Of counters too clean, too bright. Of hands he could not wash. The past had caught up. For Cole, the case finally began to loosen its grip. Not because it was forgotten, but because it had found its place among others, no longer demanding exclusive attention. It had become part of a larger pattern, a reminder that resolution was possible but never guaranteed. The fingerprint that solved Margaret Hensley's murder returned to storage, now digitized, now referenced, now known. It was no longer anonymous. It had a name, a story, a consequence. It had done its work. And yet, somewhere in the evidence room, thousands of others waited, silent and patient, pressed into surfaces by people who believed their moments would disappear. They were wrong. Because time does not erase everything. Some things endure, quiet and unnoticed, until the world finally learns how to hear them speak. The ripple did not stop with law enforcement. It moved outward, slipping into places no one had anticipated, carried by the uneasy realization that the past was not as sealed as people believed. In Illinois, in neighboring states, families with long-buried grief felt something stir. Old boxes were opened. Newspaper clippings resurfaced. Names spoken only in whispers found their way back into conversation. Margaret Hensley's case became shorthand for possibility. If that fingerprint could wait 35 years, so could others. Tip lines lit up again, flooded with voices unsure whether what they remembered mattered anymore. People called about things they had dismissed decades ago, a man who knocked too late, a car parked too long, a sound that never sat right. Most of it led nowhere. Some of it reopened wounds better left closed. But occasionally, something aligned. Aaron Cole watched it happen with measured caution. He knew momentum could be dangerous. Desperation bred false certainty. He insisted on discipline, on restraint, on letting evidence lead rather than hope. The worst thing a reopened case could do was promise closure it could not deliver. Still, the atmosphere had changed. Departments invested in digitization projects they had postponed for years. Fingerprints were rescanned. Photographs enhanced. Notes once scribbled in margins were transcribed and cross-referenced. Cold rooms warmed with activity, and with that warmth came unease. Because not every truth wanted to surface. Cole received a call from a journalist who had covered the Hensley case closely. She wanted to write a long-form piece, not about Mercer, not about the science, but about the waiting. About what it meant to live beside an unanswered question for most of a lifetime. People like the story because it ends, she said. Cole considered that. It doesn't really end, he replied. The article ran anyway. It focused on Margaret's absence rather than Mercer's guilt, on the decades where a family learned to live without resolution. Readers responded in ways the journalist had not expected. Letters arrived describing their own private cold cases, losses that had never found language. The story had become a mirror. Cole kept one letter. It was from a woman in her 60s who wrote about her sister, missing since 1979. No body. No suspects. No evidence worth preserving. Just a photograph and a feeling that something had gone terribly wrong. The woman did not ask for help. She simply thanked someone, anyone, for acknowledging that time did not erase responsibility. That idea lingered with Cole. In prison, Mercer declined interviews. He watched the attention fade with the detachment of someone who had already lived through worse isolation. When he did speak, it was to the chaplain, late at night, when the corridors were quiet. He spoke about memory, about how it sharpened in confinement, how moments he had dulled with alcohol returned in sharp, unwanted detail. "I thought forgetting was enough," he said once. "I didn't know forgetting could fail." The chaplain listened. He did not offer absolution. Cole learned about these conversations indirectly, through routine reports, through the quiet channels that carried information without commentary. Mercer was not violent. He was not disruptive. He existed in a careful, contained way, as if afraid of making any new imprint on the world. That, Cole thought, was its own kind of sentence. The Hensley house sold again. New owners repainted the exterior, changed the landscaping, erased the last visible traces of the past. They had young children. They asked neighbors about the street, about safety, about schools. No one mentioned 1985. History was not always welcome. One evening, Cole attended a training session for young detectives. He spoke about the case, about patience, about the danger of assuming silence meant nothing. A recruit raised a hand and asked the question that always came eventually. "How do you live with the ones you can't solve?" Cole paused. "You don't," he said. "You just make room for them." That answer followed him home. He thought again of the fingerprint, of how small it had been, how easy to overlook. He thought about how many others had been lost to limitations no one could have predicted. It was tempting to see the Hensley case as a triumph of technology, a neat arc from failure to success. It wasn't. It was a reminder of fragility. Of how close justice came to never arriving at all. Late that night, Cole returned to the evidence room alone. He did not open any files. He simply stood among the shelves, letting the quiet settle. Each box held a life interrupted, a story paused mid-sentence. Some would never resume. The fingerprint that cracked the Illinois 1985 cold case rested there too, catalogued, contextualized, no longer anonymous. It did not glow. It did not demand attention. It simply existed, a testament to the idea that nothing is ever completely gone. When Cole left, he turned off the lights carefully, one row at a time, as if not to startle the past. The darkness closed in gently, respectful of what it held. Outside, the city moved on, unaware of the conversations paused beneath its feet, unaware of the marks left on counters and doors and glass decades earlier. People touched surfaces without thinking, without imagining that those brief moments might one day be all that remained. That was the quiet horror of it. And the quiet hope. Because somewhere, pressed into some forgotten place, another fingerprint was waiting. Not to be found. But to be understood. The waiting changed shape after that. It became less about anticipation and more about endurance, the long, unglamorous stretch where stories settle into memory and decide whether they will harden into myth or dissolve into trivia. The Illinois 1985 cold case drifted from active conversation to reference point, cited in footnotes and training slides, invoked whenever someone needed proof that patience could still be rewarded. But endurance carried its own cost. Aaron Cole began receiving calls from families who believed, with absolute certainty, that their cases would be next. Their voices were tight with hope, sharpened by years of disappointment. Cole listened carefully, asked questions gently, explained limitations honestly. For every case reopened, dozens remained untouched. Technology could illuminate, but it could not invent what was never collected. Some calls ended in gratitude. Others ended in silence. Cole learned to recognize the moment when hope tipped into desperation. He learned when to stop talking, when to let a pause hold the weight of what could not be promised. Those pauses stayed with him longer than any conviction ever had. In one call, a man described finding a glove near a creek in 1986, something he had always believed mattered but had been too afraid to report. The glove was long gone. The creek rerouted. The moment lost. Cole thanked him anyway. Witnessing, he had learned, did not require resolution. Meanwhile, the Mercer case continued its slow migration through the public consciousness. True crime podcasts dissected it with clinical fascination, mapping timelines, debating motive, replaying interviews as if repetition might uncover something new. Margaret's name was spoken by strangers with intimate familiarity. Her life reduced to narrative beats. Cole avoided those episodes. He did not want to hear the story without its weight. In prison, Mercer aged quietly. His hair grayed. His movements slowed. Guards noted his habit of cleaning surfaces obsessively, tables, railings, his own hands. No one commented. No one needed to. The chaplain reported that Mercer had stopped talking about the crime altogether. He spoke instead about routine, about weather, about books. It was as if the confession had emptied something inside him, leaving behind a hollow space where words no longer reached. Cole wondered whether that silence was peace or surrender. The Hensley children moved forward in ways that surprised even themselves. One enrolled in a night class she had postponed for years. Another finally sorted through boxes stored since childhood, letters and photographs untouched because they felt too dangerous. They did not speak publicly. They did not correct inaccuracies in articles. They let the story be what it was. That choice mattered. At a conference in Chicago, Cole listened as a panel discussed the ethics of reopening old cases. One speaker argued that some wounds were better left undisturbed, that resolution could re-traumatize as much as it healed. Cole understood the argument. He had seen it happen. But he had also seen the alternative. Silence, he knew, was not neutral. After the panel, a young forensic analyst approached him, eyes bright with conviction. She talked about new algorithms, about predictive modeling, about the future of evidence. Cole listened, then asked a question she did not expect. What happens when the evidence speaks, but no one wants to hear it? She hesitated. That question lingered, unanswered. Late one night, Cole dreamed of the kitchen again. Not Margaret's, but an abstract version, counters stretching endlessly, surfaces layered with prints overlapping and blurring into each other. He tried to follow one set of ridges, but they dissolved beneath his touch, replaced by another, and another, until the room felt crowded with unseen presence. He woke with his hands clenched. The next morning, a package arrived at his office with no return address. Inside was a stack of old photographs and a note written in careful script. You were right to keep looking. The photographs depicted a different house, a different woman, a different decade. On the back of one photo, a date was written, 1987. There was no explanation. No contact information. Just an implication. Cole felt the familiar tightening in his chest. He logged the package, photographed everything, traced what little he could. The trail went cold quickly. The sender remained unknown. The case, whatever it was, would take time. Still, the message was clear. The past was not done. As the seasons turned, Cole found himself returning less to files and more to places, the quiet corners of the city, the in-between spaces where nothing seemed to happen. He watched people touch railings, lean against walls, leave pieces of themselves behind without ever noticing. He thought about how many stories began that way. Not with violence. With contact. The Illinois 1985 cold case had taught him that truth rarely arrived in a rush. It crept. It waited for conditions to align, for technology to catch up, for someone to care enough to ask again. It had also taught him something else. Resolution was not an ending. It was a responsibility. Every solved case changed the shape of the unsolved ones, raising expectations, shifting burdens, forcing uncomfortable questions about what had been missed and why. Cole carried that weight now, aware that success created its own shadow. The fingerprint that cracked the case had done more than identify a killer. It had disrupted the illusion that time could bury consequence. And once that illusion was gone, it was impossible to restore. Because the most dangerous thing about the past was not that it could be reopened. It was that it had never truly closed. The package without a return address refused to leave Aaron Cole's mind. It sat logged and photographed, its contents sealed in evidence bags, but the implication clung to him like a smell that would not wash away. Someone had reached across time and distance to say keep going, and that message carried a weight heavier than gratitude. Cole began where instinct told him to start, with the photographs themselves. The woman in them was younger than Margaret Hensley, early 30s maybe, standing in the doorway of a narrow house with peeling paint and a porch that sagged at the corners. The second photo showed the same doorway at night, police tape barely visible at the edge of the frame. The third was a grainy shot of a kitchen counter. Cole felt his pulse quicken. The date, 1987, placed it 2 years after Margaret's murder. The location, scribbled faintly on the back of another photo, pointed to a small town near the Illinois-Indiana border. Not Mercer's official residence at the time, but close enough to raise questions that refused to stay quiet. He requested the file. It took longer than expected to arrive, a reminder of how easily records slipped through cracks when departments merged, split, renamed themselves into something unrecognizable. When the box finally appeared on his desk, it was lighter than it should have been. The case was thin. The woman's name was Linda Alvarez. Found dead in her home in March of 1987. Single blunt force injury. No forced entry. No witnesses. The case had stalled almost immediately, overshadowed by a wave of violent crime that pulled resources elsewhere. It had never officially gone cold. It had simply stopped. Cole read the report twice, then a third time. There was a partial fingerprint. Lifted from the kitchen counter. Dismissed as unusable. Cole sat back slowly, the room seeming to tilt around him. This was not coincidence. It could not be. And yet, he forced himself to breathe, to step back from the pull of pattern-seeking that cold cases fed on so easily. He needed confirmation, not conviction. He requested the fingerprint. The lab worked quickly, aware now of what was possible. The print was faint, distorted by age and poor preservation, but it existed. Cole watched as it was scanned, enhanced, compared. He had seen this process before. He knew the pause, the slight hesitation before the system returned its verdict. This time, the system did not pause. No match. The room exhaled. Cole did not. Because absence was not exoneration. The databases were broader than they had been, but still incomplete. The print could belong to someone never arrested, never catalogued, someone who had slipped through the machinery of accountability entirely. Cole compared the Alvarez print to Mercer's manually, overlaying ridge patterns, tracing curves and forks. They did not align. Whatever had happened in that house in 1987, it was not Mercer. The relief was unexpected and brief. If not Mercer, then who? And why did the crime look so familiar? Cole contacted the department that had handled the Alvarez case. Most of the original investigators were gone. One retired lieutenant remembered it vaguely, a quiet town, a quick investigation, nothing to hold on to. When Cole mentioned the fingerprint, the man sighed. We had a lot of those, he said. We didn't know what to do with them. Cole hung up and stared at the photos again. 2 women. 2 kitchens. 2 counters marked by violence and contact. The similarity felt intentional, as if the crimes were speaking to each other across years. But cold cases punished assumption. Cole pulled back, widened his scope. He searched for other cases in the region with similar details. The list grew longer than he expected. Too long. Women killed in their homes. No forced entry. Single decisive blow. Partial prints collected, filed, forgotten. Most were not Mercer. Some were never solved. Cole realized then what truly unsettled him about the Hensley case. It was not just that it had been solved late. It was that it had revealed a blind spot, a period where evidence existed but could not be interpreted, where patterns may have formed unnoticed simply because the tools to see them did not exist yet. The past was not just silent. It had been speaking in a language no one understood. Cole compiled the cases into a private working file. No task force. No press. Just a map of echoes. He traced geography, timelines, employment records, anything that could connect or separate the events. Most lines led nowhere. A few intersected briefly, then vanished again. The danger was clear. Seeing patterns where none existed was easy. Proving one was something else entirely. The anonymous package remained unsolved. Cole never learned who sent it or why now. Perhaps it was someone burdened by memory. Perhaps it was coincidence sharpened by recent headlines. Perhaps it was nothing more than a reminder that solving one case did not grant immunity from the rest. Still, the Alvarez file stayed on his desk longer than the others. In prison, Mercer read about similar cases in the newspapers left in the common area. He scanned them with mild interest, then returned to his book. When asked by a guard whether he recognized any names, he shook his head. One was enough, he said. Whether that was truth or convenience no longer mattered. Cole found himself standing again in an evidence room, this time not to listen but to acknowledge. Rows of boxes extended beyond sight, each one a question waiting for the right moment. He understood now that the Hensley case had not closed a chapter. It had opened a door. A door into a past crowded with voices that had never stopped speaking, only learned to wait. Some would never be heard. Some would arrive too late to change anything that mattered. And some, like Margaret Hensley's, would cut through decades with a single, undeniable mark. The fingerprint had cracked one case. But it had also exposed a truth far more unsettling. There were more. The realization settled slowly, like dust after a collapse. There were more cases, more kitchens, more counters bearing silent witness to moments that had never been given names. The Hensley fingerprint had not just solved a murder, it had illuminated a corridor of the past that no one had thought to walk down before. Aaron Cole resisted the urge to rush. He had learned that urgency was the enemy of clarity. Cold cases demanded patience not because time healed them, but because haste distorted them. So he worked quietly, building a framework that did not promise answers, only structure. He cataloged similarities without forcing connections, mapped overlaps without drawing conclusions. The pattern, if it existed, was subtle. Not a serial killer in the cinematic sense. No signature, no ritual. Just a method, access through familiarity, violence triggered by proximity, evidence reduced to touch. Crimes that could be dismissed individually as isolated tragedies, but together hinted at something more troubling. A vulnerability. Cole presented his findings internally, careful with language, deliberate in tone. He did not say series. He said cluster. He did not say killer. He said circumstances. The distinction mattered. It kept the work grounded, defensible, resistant to the kind of myth-making that destroyed credibility. Some colleagues were skeptical. Others listened in silence, recognizing the shape of something they had felt but never named. The department approved a limited review. No announcements. No task force banners. Just permission to look again. That was enough. Cole began with the evidence that had been dismissed first: partial fingerprints, smudged impressions, fragments that once fell below the threshold of usefulness. Technology could not resurrect everything, but it could sometimes coax meaning from what remained. Each scan was an act of restraint, an agreement not to force the outcome. Most returned nothing. A few returned possibilities. In one case from 1984, the print matched a man who had died years earlier. In another, it pointed to someone already incarcerated for an unrelated crime. Each discovery carried its own weight, its own questions. Why had no one looked harder then? What else had been missed? The answers were never singular. Funding. Training. Limitations no one had imagined would one day matter. Cole documented everything. He wrote as if someone else would read it years from now, as if his own work might become another artifact in a box, waiting for better tools, better eyes. The Hensley case appeared again and again in his thinking, not as a triumph but as a warning. It had come dangerously close to remaining unsolved forever. If the fingerprint had degraded just a little more, if the algorithm had been slightly less refined, Margaret's name might still be filed under unanswered. Chance played a role no one liked to acknowledge. At a small departmental gathering, a veteran detective raised a glass and toasted science. Cole smiled politely but said nothing. Science mattered, yes. But it was not the hero of the story. Persistence was. One evening, long after the building had emptied, Cole sat alone with the Alvarez file open in front of him. He was not looking for Mercer anymore. He was looking for context. The town. The year. The people who had moved through that space briefly, leaving little behind. He noticed something he had missed before, a notation about a traveling maintenance crew hired to repair municipal buildings that winter. Temporary workers. No full names recorded. Just initials. It was not a lead. It was a direction. Cole added it to the map. The Mercer appeal reached its final stage and was denied again. The decision was brief, procedural, almost indifferent. 35 years after Margaret Hensley's death, the legal system had finally finished with Daniel Mercer. The past, however, was not finished with Cole. He visited Maplewood Drive once more, not out of necessity but habit. The street looked smaller now, tamer. The kind of place where nothing remarkable should ever happen. He stood there for a moment, listening to the ordinary sounds of life, a lawn mower, a distant radio, a door closing. This was what had been interrupted. Cole realized then that the real danger of cold cases was not forgetting the victims. It was forgetting the ordinariness of their lives, the ease with which violence had slipped in unnoticed. The fingerprint had preserved that intrusion, captured the exact point where normalcy broke. That was its power. As Cole walked back to his car, he thought about the evidence rooms across the country, about the thousands of boxes holding similar moments of interruption. He thought about how many would never be revisited, not because they were unimportant, but because attention was finite. The Illinois 1985 cold case had cracked open one door. What lay beyond it was not a hallway leading neatly to answers, but a vast, cluttered room filled with half-seen shapes and unfinished sentences. Cole did not know how many of those sentences could be completed. He only knew that listening mattered. Because the fingerprint had taught him something essential. Justice was not a destination. It was an act, repeated over time, whenever someone chose to look again. The story never announced its ending. It thinned out instead, like a voice fading at the edge of hearing, leaving behind a silence that felt earned rather than empty. The Illinois 1985 cold case had traveled as far as it could go, carrying with it everything it had gathered along the way: grief, persistence, chance, and the quiet weight of time. Aaron Cole understood that now. He did not close the final folder with ceremony. There was no gesture that could contain what the case had become. He filed his last memo, logged his final observations, and let the record stand as it was, incomplete in the ways that mattered, resolved in the ways that counted. Margaret Hensley's name remained at the center, not as a symbol, not as a lesson, but as a person whose life had been interrupted and then slowly, imperfectly, acknowledged. The fingerprint that had once rested unnoticed on a kitchen counter had done its work, not because it was powerful, but because it had been preserved. Preservation was everything. In time, Cole stepped away from cold case work. Not abruptly, not dramatically. He took on fewer reviews, mentored younger detectives, answered questions when asked. He watched as the tools he had once struggled to trust became standard, as partial prints and degraded samples were treated with patience rather than dismissal. Progress did not erase the past. It only reframed it. On his last day in the unit, Cole walked through the evidence room one final time. He did not stop at the Hensley box. He did not need to. Its presence was woven into every shelf, every label, every careful choice to keep something rather than discard it. He turned off the lights slowly, knowing that darkness did not mean absence. It simply meant waiting. Elsewhere, life moved forward with the indifference only time could sustain. Maplewood Drive aged gracefully, its history absorbed into the quiet rhythm of days. Children grew up without knowing the weight the street once carried. Doors opened and closed. Counters were wiped clean. But touch remained. Fingerprints layered over one another, invisible and enduring, carrying identities forward whether anyone was looking or not. Most would never matter. Some would wait. Daniel Mercer lived out his sentence without incident. He was not redeemed. He was not sensationalized. He became part of the system that had once failed to catch him, another name in another file. The past did not forgive him. It did not need to. What mattered was that it had spoken. The families who had watched the case unfold found their own endings. Some found relief. Some found only a different kind of grief. None found erasure. That was never an option. The Illinois 1985 cold case cracked not because time was kind, but because someone chose to listen to something time had almost buried. That choice echoed outward, changing how other silences were heard, how other forgotten details were treated. And somewhere, in a room no one visited often enough, another box waited. Inside it, perhaps, was a partial print. A fragment. A moment pressed into a surface by someone who believed it would disappear. It would not. Because the past does not vanish. It waits. And when it is finally heard, it does not ask for drama or applause. Only attention. Silence was never the absence of sound. It was accumulation. Years layered themselves over the case like fingerprints on glass, each one invisible unless the light hit at the right angle. Long after reports stopped being written and headlines stopped circulating, the story continued to exist in quieter forms, in habits, in hesitations, in the way certain questions were no longer asked out loud. Aaron Cole felt that weight most clearly after he left the unit. Without the daily rhythm of case reviews and evidence logs, memory took on a different texture. It stopped behaving like a timeline and began acting like weather, appearing without warning, changing the atmosphere of otherwise ordinary moments. A coffee mug left too close to the edge of a counter. A door left unlocked overnight. Small things that reminded him how fragile order always was. The Illinois 1985 cold case had ended on paper, but it had not concluded in him. He understood now why some investigators never truly retired. They carried unresolved echoes, not of facts, but of spaces, kitchens, hallways, thresholds where something irreversible had happened. Margaret Hensley's kitchen was one of those spaces. It had become a reference point, a silent coordinate in Cole's internal map of violence. What unsettled him most was how unremarkable it had been. No dramatic struggle. No theatrical cruelty. Just a moment where presence turned into threat. That ordinariness was what made the fingerprint unbearable to ignore. It was proof that catastrophe did not always announce itself. Sometimes it arrived quietly, left a trace, and trusted time to erase the rest. Time had nearly succeeded. Cole occasionally received emails from departments across the state, sometimes across the country. They were cautious, respectful, almost tentative. A question about degraded prints. A request for guidance on reprocessing old evidence. The Hensley case had become a reference, not a blueprint, but an example of what restraint and patience could uncover. He always answered. Not with promises. With methods. He warned them about expectation. About the danger of believing that technology alone could redeem the past. For every success, there were dozens of cases that yielded nothing but confirmation of loss. He emphasized documentation, chain of custody, humility before the unknown. Most importantly, he stressed preservation. Because even unanswered cases deserved the dignity of being intact. In one exchange, a young investigator asked him how it felt to finally solve a case that old. Cole paused before responding. He deleted 3 drafts before settling on the truth. It didn't feel like solving, he wrote. It felt like being allowed to listen. That distinction mattered. Listening required accepting what you might hear. Sometimes it was resolution. Sometimes it was silence that stayed silent. The Hensley fingerprint had spoken, but it had done so reluctantly, as if unsure it would be believed. Cole often wondered how many other traces had tried to speak and been dismissed. In the broader public memory, the case began to flatten. Articles condensed years into paragraphs. Documentaries framed it as inevitability, science catching up, justice delayed but delivered. The narrative was comforting. It suggested a moral arc bending slowly but reliably toward closure. Cole knew better. There had been nothing inevitable about it. The fingerprint could have smudged beyond recognition. The evidence box could have been discarded during a budget cut. The database algorithm could have prioritized efficiency over depth. Mercer could have died before identification. Any one of those would have ended the story differently. Chance was not a footnote. It was a co-author. That understanding followed Cole into the rest of his life. He became more attentive, more deliberate. He noticed details others overlooked, not because he was trained to, but because he no longer trusted disappearance. He saved things. He documented moments. He believed in the future's right to look again. The community around Maplewood Drive continued to evolve, unaware of how closely it had once brushed against oblivion. The house where Margaret Hensley had lived changed hands twice more. Renovations erased the original kitchen entirely. New counters. New paint. New surfaces to hold new lives. Yet even those changes did not negate what had happened. Violence did not reside in the materials. It resided in memory. Some nights, Cole imagined the fingerprint as it had been the moment it was made, warm, precise, unthinking. A hand resting briefly where it did not belong. No awareness of consequence. No understanding that decades later, it would be isolated, enlarged, scrutinized. That was the irony of evidence. It outlived intention. Daniel Mercer had not planned to leave a signature. He had simply existed in a space and assumed, as so many did, that presence faded without residue. The fingerprint disproved that assumption. It argued for permanence in a world obsessed with erasure. Mercer himself faded quietly. His name appeared less frequently in records. Age thinned his relevance. The system absorbed him the way it absorbed everyone eventually. There were no final statements, no reckoning speeches. Justice did not need them. What lingered instead was the lesson the case imposed on those who paid attention, that the past was not passive. It waited, alert, storing its fragments patiently, indifferent to human schedules. In that waiting was a kind of warning. Cole gave one last lecture before fully stepping away from public work. He did not recount the case in detail. He did not show photos or play audio. He spoke instead about humility, about the responsibility carried by every label affixed to a box. When you decide something doesn't matter, he told the room, you're deciding for the future. And the future doesn't always agree with you. The room was quiet. Not the stunned silence of revelation, but the thoughtful quiet of recognition. Some truths did not need emphasis. They settled on their own. Afterward, a student approached him and asked what he believed happened to all the cases that were never solved. Cole considered the question carefully. They don't disappear, he said. They just wait for someone who knows how to listen. That was all. The Illinois 1985 cold case had not restored balance to the world. It had not undone loss or rewritten history. It had done something smaller, and perhaps more important. It had proven that attention mattered. That even the faintest trace could carry meaning across decades. That silence was not empty. That forgetting was a choice. And somewhere, in another evidence room, under fluorescent lights that hummed without interest, another fingerprint waited, pressed into a surface by a hand that believed time would be merciful. Time rarely was. But memory, when preserved, could be. And that was enough. The story refused to stay still. Even after everything had been said, filed, archived, and reduced to citations, it continued to move in subtle ways, like a current beneath ice. The Illinois 1985 cold case no longer belonged to the moment it was solved. It had entered a different state, not history, not memory, but something in between, where unresolved questions still breathed quietly. Aaron Cole noticed it in conversations. People spoke differently now. Detectives hesitated before dismissing a degraded sample. Evidence technicians lingered a second longer before sealing a box. Prosecutors asked questions that once would have felt impractical. None of this was dramatic. There were no declarations of reform. Just a collective adjustment, almost unconscious, as if the system itself had learned a new reflex. The fingerprint had done that. Not by existing, but by surviving. Cole understood that survival was never guaranteed. Evidence endured only when someone believed it might one day matter. That belief was fragile, easily eroded by workload, budget, fatigue. The Hensley case had slipped through those pressures once already. It would not be the last. He sometimes wondered what Margaret Hensley would have thought if she knew the role she would play decades after her death, not as a headline, not as a symbol, but as a quiet pivot point in how people treated the past. The thought was unsettling. No one should have to earn relevance through violence. And yet, relevance had been earned. The cold case designation carried a different weight now. It no longer meant abandoned. It meant suspended. Waiting for conditions to change. Waiting for technology, or perspective, or courage to catch up. Cole watched as younger investigators approached these cases without the old cynicism. They were still realistic. They knew most would not break open. But they no longer equated difficulty with futility. That shift mattered more than any single arrest. In private moments, Cole reflected on how close the case had come to remaining unresolved forever. The evidence box had nearly been purged during a storage reorganization in the late 1990s. A handwritten note in the margin of an inventory log, retained pending review, had saved it. No one remembered who wrote it. An anonymous decision. An invisible intervention. That anonymity felt appropriate. The case had never belonged to one person. Not to Cole. Not to the lab technician who rescanned the print. Not even to the system that eventually named Mercer. It belonged to the accumulation of small, uncelebrated choices that resisted erasure. That was the truth no documentary ever captured. As time passed, the public narrative simplified. It always did. Articles focused on the breakthrough, the arrest, the shock. They favored the clean arc of mystery to resolution. The long stretches of uncertainty, the years of inaction, the uncomfortable questions about why it took so long, those were condensed or omitted. Cole did not correct them. Stories needed shape. Reality rarely offered it. But privately, he remained uneasy with the word, cracked. It implied force, suddenness, a decisive moment. The Illinois 1985 cold case had not cracked. It had yielded, slowly, reluctantly, after decades of being ignored. Yielding was quieter than cracking. And more honest. He stayed in touch with one of Margaret Hensley's distant relatives, a woman who had been a child when the murder happened. Their conversations were brief, careful. There was no expectation of closure. She once told him that what mattered most was not that someone had been arrested, but that Margaret's death was no longer treated as an unsolvable curiosity. "She feels less lost now," the woman said. The phrase stayed with him. Less lost did not mean found. It meant acknowledged. In the broader system, changes continued incrementally. Old cases were recatalogued. Evidence handling protocols were revised. Partial prints were flagged rather than discarded. None of it made headlines. None of it needed to. Impact rarely announced itself. Cole eventually moved to a smaller town, far from the urban centers where cold cases piled up fastest. The quiet suited him. He spent more time walking, less time reading reports. Still, the habits remained. He noticed doorways. He noticed hands. Touch, once understood, was impossible to ignore. Sometimes, late at night, he imagined the countless traces left behind every day, on railings, tabletops, car doors. Each one a marker of presence, fleeting yet stubborn. Most would never intersect with violence. Most would dissolve into noise. But a few would endure, waiting for meaning. The unsettling part was not that evidence existed everywhere. It was that context decided its value. Without context, the fingerprint was nothing. Just a smudge. Just residue. Context transformed it into accusation, into truth, into consequence. That transformation depended entirely on human attention. Cole believed that was the real lesson of the case. Not that science could resurrect the past. But that the past required caretakers. Years after the arrest, a small symposium on forensic preservation invited Cole to speak again. He hesitated before accepting. He no longer enjoyed standing in front of rooms, no longer trusted his words to remain intact once they left him. But he went. He spoke plainly. He did not dramatize. He told them that the most dangerous phrase in any investigation was, probably nothing. He reminded them that probability was a moving target, shaped by the limits of the moment. What you can't use today, he said, might be everything tomorrow. The room listened. Afterward, no one applauded immediately. The silence that followed was not awkward. It was thoughtful. It lingered. That felt right. As the years continued to layer themselves over the case, its edges softened. New crimes demanded attention. New tragedies reshaped priorities. The Illinois 1985 cold case drifted further into the background, becoming a reference point rather than a focus. That was inevitable. Nothing stayed at the center forever. But the fingerprint remained, preserved digitally now, replicated across secure servers, immune to physical decay. It existed beyond the constraints of its origin, detached from the kitchen where it was first made, yet still anchored to the moment it represented. A moment of intrusion. A moment of violence. A moment that refused to disappear. Cole found comfort in that refusal. Because forgetting was easy. Preserving was work. And work, unlike memory, required choice. On an ordinary afternoon, years removed from the case, Cole passed a crime scene tape fluttering lazily in the wind. A minor incident. Nothing serious. Still, he paused, watching the way the tape marked a boundary, how it signaled that something had happened here, something that demanded attention. Boundaries mattered. They told the world where not to look away. The Illinois 1985 cold case had drawn such a boundary across decades, insisting that time alone did not absolve unanswered questions. It reminded anyone willing to listen that silence was not neutral. It favored the unresolved. It protected the unknown. Only attention disrupted it. As Cole walked on, leaving the tape behind, he felt no sense of completion. Only continuity. The understanding that stories like this did not end, they receded, waiting to resurface when conditions allowed. Somewhere, another case was cooling. Another box was being sealed. Another trace was being dismissed as insufficient. And somewhere in the future, someone would decide to look again. Not because they expected miracles, but because the past had taught them what patience could uncover. That was the enduring echo of Illinois, 1985. Not an answer. A responsibility.